And a lot of the old, I guess specifically Indian literature that I've read, there's a lot of emphasis on the guru, on the teacher. And I can see definitely why that would be opposed in the West. But there's something which see always comes up in the non-duality thing, the non-duality world of comments and the craziness of the internet. Which actually I don't think is that crazy, but the internet's definitely a wild place. But this thing that comes up is not really that wild. It actually makes a lot of sense, and it kind of goes along with this guru idea. Yeah. I understand totally why people move away from that thing, but there is an importance, I feel, in the value of a proper guide or a teacher, because there's a lot of like side roads that this non-duality negation thing can take, which I feel can really mislead. And one of the things we see a lot and being talked about a lot is bypassing. Especially if you have a past habit pattern of repressing emotions. Yeah. Now that's not you repressing emotions. Okay, it's often created by some sort of trauma from childhood or a sense of false self which is built up from things that have happened in life. Yeah. I'm no expert on this. I can see it from both angles experientially, and if you're really interested in this particular topic, I would suggest reading Judith Blackstone's books, specifically one called The Subtle Self, because studying with her for about a year and a half exposed a lot of this stuff and why it makes sense. Yeah. I'm no super expert, but I've experienced it in my own life in this body, and then also in being around her. So there's this concept of bypassing which makes complete sense. I do understand it, especially if you have a habit pattern of repressing thoughts and emotions and feelings and sensations and things. Yeah. Negation, the approach of I'm not that, of what's being perceived in your experience of meeting it with I'm not that, can absolutely be used as a way to reify the habit of repression. And I got caught in that for some time. It makes things very uncomfortable, and it tightens the whole system. It tightens the psychological system, the physical system, the emotional system. It tightens the whole fucking thing. It does not present you with the experience of Advaita or Zen. Yeah, it does reify that habit pattern in my experience. But even though I understand it and have experienced it, I do believe that it is a misunderstanding of negation. It's a misuse of negation. And this is why a proper teacher is really important. Because a proper teacher would be able to identify that and tell you what's going on. In my experience, it's happened to me like this. Ramana wrote about it as the policeman and the thief, which I really like that analogy that he uses. And the way that it's come up to me is this way. If you were to sit down, this gets what catches people in meditation practice a lot, is that you sit down, let's say, and a thought arises. So we'll just use thought. But thought could be any energy movement, yeah? Thought is just an arising or let's say a wave of energy movement. It could be sensation, it could be feeling, it could be emotion. Whatever energy movement's presenting itself at that time. I'm going to say a thought because we all can identify with this. A thought arises in your experience, yeah? Now there's a sense of being the one who sees that thought. And that sense of being the one who sees that thought would then go and negate that thought. It would essentially say, I'm not that. Yeah. That movement right there, if there's a habit pattern of repression, that is going to reify that habit pattern if you stop right there, which in my feeling is where most people stop. And you can see that because people will say that they're the awakened one or they're the seer. Yeah. But this is the issue with negation. Is what happens is the thought comes up, and Ramana would call that the thief, yeah, let's say. The thought comes up, and then there's a sense of being the one who sees the thought. So there's the policeman. Yeah? And then they stop there, and they say, I'm the seer, I'm the one who sees the thought. But what actually happens is that policeman represses that movement. It puts a stop on that movement. Yeah? It doesn't negate it properly. It's trying to pause that movement. In a way, that policeman can also move to try to say that that movement doesn't exist. Yeah? Now, in a philosophical absolute language, it doesn't have an existence without reality, without the awareness of what you are, yeah? But from the policeman's point of view, it's not going to see it that way. Yeah? The sense of being the one seeing a movement in the head is actually going to repress and tighten. Because now there's a feeling that you're the seer of the thought. Yeah? In that way, I can understand how that bypassing happens, because I've experienced this before. But a true negation would be to see the thought arise, and then as soon as that policeman shows its face to being the seer, there's a negation of also that policeman. You see, you're neither of those two things. When negation is done that way, in my experience, there's not a repression that happens of what's happening. It's just meeting it with an I'm not that, and then boop, I'm also not that. And then there's a loosening. Yeah, there's a disentanglement from both of those presentations, because both of those presentations are from self. Those are two faces of self. Let's say the two main faces of self in many ways. If you're taking yourself to be the seer of thought, you're kind of fucked in a way, because you're stuck in that. Now it's not that you're identified as a thought, but you're identified as the seer of the thought. Yeah. And it's just as sticky. It's not, there's not a loosening there. Yeah, there's not a joy in that. Yeah. Because now you're stuck to the opinions of the policeman rather than being stuck to the opinions of the thief. It just changes faces. Yeah. And this is really so important to see this, man. And I feel like it's why obviously Ramana presented it, was because you have to meet both faces with negation. And it's not a negation like a hateful negation. Robert Adams, if you are into the non-duality world, whether your opinions on him, he does write about negation as like a very soft, quiet movement. Meaning you're just seeing things arise and meeting it softly. Oh, I'm not that, yeah. Or who? Or to who does it arise? Or who am I? It's not like an attacking, you see. If there's an attacking movement, that's the policeman attacking the thief. And now you're bound to being the policeman. So the thief can arise in many different ways, and so can the policeman. And it's not just in seated meditation or whatever you're doing. It can arise in your life. Like, for a long time, I was super addicted to work, and I was living as the policeman, where I was super, super tight. So to get relief from that, I would like turn into the thief and go drinking. You know? And I just keep flipping back and forth between these two, man. Oh. And you're stuck either way. On either side of it, you're stuck. And there's not that relief that you're looking for. Yeah, because you're stuck in one of these two. This is like the perfect example of duality. Thought, and then there's a seer of a thought. Well, there's duality right there. You are neither of those. You have to negate both duality. You see? This is non-duality. It's not two-ness. But if you're living as the policeman, that habit of repression, you have to be careful. If that is a movement that is in your system, yeah, that is part of the individuality, let's say, is a habit pattern, you got to be super careful with negation, because self will take that, it will take negation and it will start to use it to reify that pattern of repression. And your experience will not become looser and more joyous. It will become a lot tighter. And then you're going to the head is going to start to push harder on negation. And harder, and the system will tighten and tighten more, and it'll draw. Yeah. The experience will get a lot tighter. You see it in recovery too. People come into addiction recovery, and then they turn into the policeman. I also did this. This was another thing that took part in this experience for sure. I went into recovery, and then I was going to be the perfect Buddhist. And I started to repress a lot of shit. Yeah. And I would get like openings from that, but there wasn't an understanding of why, so the habit pattern would come back in of like, can't think those thoughts, have to do this, it's got to be tight. And that tension, it's just as bad as, like the policeman in recovery is just as bad as the fucking thief out drinking in a way. Because there's still that massive discomfort. Actually, it's probably more uncomfortable than being out and drinking. So it's something that you've got to see. And it doesn't just manifest in addiction recovery, or it doesn't just manifest in like meditation. It manifests all over the place, where there's this movement that takes place, and then there's a want to get out of that movement. But the one who wants to get out of that movement, you also have to meet that with negation. You see? And that leaves you at like 0 point. It's like neutrality. And being placed in neutrality, there's a lot of relief. And then you see the head come back up and try to repress again. And it just keeps presenting itself. But you got to be careful to hit both of those two. With it's not a hateful negation. It's not a trying to get rid of. It's just a seeing. It's not a denial. Yeah? It's a disentangling from, so that you can sit into what you already are, or what's already there, which is before both of those. And that's the relief. The relief sits there. And maybe there's some psychological work or something that needs to be done on that repression habit. You see? Because if you disentangle from both the policeman and the thief and you sit into what you are, there's a great relief. But will it alter that repressive habit? Maybe not. I don't really know. I feel like there might be more processing that's needed in that way. Yeah, on the psychological system. Even though you can disentangle from it and there's a knowing that you're not it, the repetition of its habit patterns needs some sort of massaging, AA is really good for that. The 12 steps are really good for that, but that's just one method of working with the body and the mind, the individuality. Yeah. Just to make it a little more comfortable to walk through the day. You see? And this is why, if you come back to the guru thing, it's like, we put all this weight on the body and the mind of the teacher or the guru. Yeah, and they're not that. You see, and they know they're not that. So they let it manifest, however, like Nisargadatta smoking cigarettes and yelling. It's like amazing to watch that. But from the outside, people see that and they say, well, this guy can't be awake at all. He's like, because they're putting all this weight on the body and the mind. And it's not the body and the mind that wakes up. You wake up before the body and the mind. And then the body and the mind plays itself out. It's probably, the body and the mind are not going to go out hurting people. They're going to see it clearer. But there's still going to be habit patterns in the body and the mind. The awake alcoholic's still going to AA. If not to get a little massage in the character that you're the individual, but to serve, to help others, So anyways, this habit of repression that's held with the policeman, if you're not negating both faces, you're stuck. And that habit of repression, if that's part of your experience, will continue. It will continue to rule the life. Yeah? And now you're just seeing from the eyes of the policeman. And that will tighten your experience a lot. It will increase that habit to repress, which is the habit that you're already liberated from, but in negation there has to be a negation of the whole story, you see? We can't be holding on to parts, because those parts they reify the habits. Yeah, so you could look up The Policeman and the Thief by Ramana, but that's pretty much my understanding of it. Yeah. There's a movement, there's an energy that arises. You see that. There's something that says, I'm not that. You also have to negate that sense of being the one who sees, because you're just stuck in the same head. That's the see, the seen and the seer. Yeah, neither are you. There's a seeing before both of those. There's a hearing or a listening or whatever before both of those. Yeah. This is why it's important to get some guidance on that stuff, I feel. Because these psychological habits will repeat themselves. And then it makes negation uncomfortable.